So this is just a reminder to everyone that we're recording this meeting and to let you know that it is being recorded for future use. So just a reminder, welcome to the Platinum Rule, Dealing with People. And Michaela Curtis is here today to help us. She's enjoying the rain are you in Mississippi at this point, Michaela?
I am.
Yes. So in Mississippi, and we look forward to hearing her tell us what she's learned about the Platinum Rule and how it can help us be more efficient and be better at dealing with people.
All right. Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you everyone for joining us. I know I see a lot of familiar names that were with us a couple nights ago when Ray presented Intentional Conversations. And this is Intentional Conversations was the jumping off point to lead us to this one. We often present these two one after the other, and the goal of this course is to help people be a little more comfortable with having some conversations. So let's go to the next slide. See, all right, so our objectives while we're here today is to understand the importance of dealing with all people. And we'll see why that's really important. It's not just that one person needs all of our attention, it's that we need to pay attention to all people. To define and understand difficult people. I think we've all had some experience with that, and we want to see what best ways we can identify to deal with that. Identify coping strategies for common types of difficult people. Learn the anatomy of a crucial conversation. I know we mentioned that in Intentional Conversations, but we're going to spend a few more minutes talking about that. And then identify a formula for success, how to neutralize or deal more effectively with people. And then documentation, what to document, why to document, and when to document. All right, I tried to advance the slide, it didn't go anywhere. There we go. So I want everyone to feel comfortable. Raise your hand if you want to say something. Take some time and put it in chat. Kirsten is watching chat for us. And I'm throwing this out as a question to everyone. Can we over-communicate? And you can come off mute and comment if you like. Quiet crowd. Okay, well, we can over communicate in that, and I think each of us have been in a position where we got so many emails that we got buried. We couldn't even figure out what email we needed to start with next. And so while we often say, communicate, it's better to over communicate, put it in perspective. Think about it, especially as disaster responders when you're assigned to a DRO. And you may be receiving between 15 and 75 emails in a day. I've seen some people end up with even more. So think about that as we go through the rest of this. Ineffective communication can create as many misunderstandings, missed opportunities, conflict, or dissemination of misinformation, and that leads to mistrust. We all need to be very mindful of that while we're working to communicate with people. We know what needs to be shared. Sometimes we have to ask, well, what does the other person need in order to do their task? What things need to be understood? And a lack of good communication can quickly create low morale. And good communication is different from person to person. You have to take some time to get to know your team and find out what is a good rhythm of communication, what tactics work really well for your individual teams, who communicates very well, and what things do you have to do to work together so that each team member is feeling like they've received good communication, they've got good information, they have what they need in order to do their job well. And work culture is a big factor that becomes a stressor if communication is not done well. Can anyone describe what work culture means? Quiet crowd still. Chuck, do you have any thoughts on work culture?
Sometimes it's just work. In that respect, I think just a lot of work.
Yeah, it absolutely can be. It can almost be too much work, even though we know that we need to get the work done. the word culture takes on a positive or a negative tone. And if you have a positive work culture, people feel valued, they feel validated, they feel the mission, and they're moving in that direction, then they'll put up with the stressors and even the poor communication and the things that are happening. But if there is a negative work culture, there's a negative feeling about how things are going, a negative tone about it, it's a lot harder to put up with the stressors, and people are much more likely to excuse me, to tune out and to miss opportunities that were there, might miss deadlines, or might withdraw from communication overall. Did I see somebody with their hand up just a moment ago?
Hillary
No.
had her hand up for a second.
Hillary, did you want to say something?
I was going to answer, but you answered much better than I could. So I was just slow on the draw.
Oh, thank you. Please do share that this class works best if we have this conversation and we work through this together. But worker satisfaction can be measured in many different ways, but in my experience, it always comes back to some component of communication. If someone doesn't know that they're doing a good job, then it hasn't been communicated to them. Sometimes it's nonverbal. They see that you're smiling and you're happy. You can tell by their look. That it's really important, though, that in this virtual environment that COVID has left us with, worker satisfaction is really struggling. We have to find ways to communicate in ways that other people want to be communicated with. We have to identify the tools that work best for the teams. And even within that, we have to find out what tools work best for the individuals. We were speaking earlier today with somebody, and it came out that she does not like emails. Well, as a default, we tend to use a lot of emails in Red Cross, and we really have to find out what preferred method of communication someone has, because if they don't know that we appreciate them, then they are going to have low satisfaction. And low satisfaction will lead us to low retention, or they leave overall. They're finished with it. And it matters to us individually. As a supervisor and a manager, for me, it feels good to know that my team members are satisfied. They feel well engaged. They're happy with what's going on. And then meaningful experiences. It's really important. When I've spoken with individuals with other organizations, as well as within Red Cross, when I ask them, why did they volunteer? What triggered that? There's been a whole host of reasons why, but then when you ask them, what do they hope to get out of it? It almost always distills down to, they want a meaningful experience, something that touched them personally. And it may be that that meaningful experience was driving an IRF. It may have been speaking with a client. It may have been cleaning cots. But it was something that was very unique to them and specific to them. It was meaningful at their level. And that leads us to the Platinum Rule. Does anyone on the training know what the Platinum Rule is? Take a stab at it.
Treating others the way they want to be treated as opposed to the way you want to be treated.
Exactly. You know, we tend, that's really, it hits the nail on the head. And we often forget that. We hear so much about the golden rule and treat others the way that you want to be treated. But what we really need to get to is treat people the way they want to be treated. And a perfect example of that happened a couple years ago, where I was working with the volunteer services team and the engagement committee to put together a recognition event. And we were coming up with the different things that we could give people and make sure that they would feel appreciated by all. And we had designated that this one volunteer had gotten, not only a large number of hours, but many people had regularly given us positive comments about him. And so it was decided by the committee that they were going to surprise him with an award at the dinner. And as it turned out at the dinner, when they got ready to call his name, he was sitting there looking around. They called his name and he just wilted. It was such a shock to him. I didn't know him personally at the time, but he was made to feel so, or not made to feel, he felt so uncomfortable by that. It wasn't something that he appreciated or was meaningful to him. He personally felt like he had been put on the spot, and yet the group of people around him, that was not their intention at all. The intention was to recognize him and to appreciate him. And what we learned in that really what I call a light bulb moment was that we really have to get to know the individual better. We have to ask people. We have to find out what things would they like? How do they want to be recognized? And a lot of that takes us back to our volunteer engagement and getting those scores. But for me, it comes down to having conversations with people, finding out how they want to receive information, how do they want to share information, and what do I have to do to be a part of a team that builds a positive work culture where everyone feels satisfied and we all feel appreciated for the hard work that we've put in. So has anyone had a difficult person to work with? Can somebody tell me about an instance that you struggled with and it was a difficult problem or a difficult individual? Yes, Renice.
I had a manager who kept yelling at the workforce, telling them that if they couldn't do their job, they were going to be sent home. So I kept, as a supervisor, I kept having to take him outside of the building to tell him he can't talk to them that way, and that it was a reflection on leadership if they can't do the job, but he wouldn't listen. So I would say he was pretty difficult. And then I saw him later on a couple other DRs, and he was actually promoted.
Wow, that is a difficult one, and sadly a common one that we see too. Robin, you have one?
Yeah, someone who just was never in the place they were supposed to be. So they were really busy, but doing the things we didn't need that person to be doing, not doing the things they needed to be doing. And when I talked to him about it, he would say, but I'm working so hard and you don't value me.
Oh, wow. What a great example. It truly is. You know, and you hit the nail on the head, both of you. You know, difficult people are ones who don't do what we want them to do, and they do what we don't want them to do. And so as supervisors and as leads, as managers and as team members and peers, we have to figure out how to handle this relationship. And our choices are, what are we going to do? If we continue to keep doing the same thing, will the problem fix itself? It's very unlikely that it's going to fix itself. And if, you know, once in a while somebody go, well, if I do nothing, then they'll go work for someone else. Well, that's passing the buck. That's not really a good approach to it. And so what we have to do is deal with it. We have to clarify expectations. We have to be sure that we've communicated those very clearly. And then we have to enforce consequences. And that can be a really difficult conversation to have if you're not comfortable with that. Part of this offering is to have you volunteer some information, to share and get comfortable having conversations. When you realize that giving constructive criticism is actually a skill that can be done well and can be appreciated, then you can learn to incorporate some of those techniques into your regular conversations. Did someone else have their hand up?
Yeah, I did. This is Blue Mill. What do
Yes.
you do if it's your manager that is the difficult person and you can never reach them, and you leave phone messages, emails, and you're left kind of dangling out in the dark?
Yeah, that can be a real difficult situation, and we have to identify other ways to communicate, and some of that depends on whether you're on a DRO, and sometimes you may have to, you know, go around to that person, supervisor or manager, and say, I'm trying to reach this person, that I don't think the phone number is working. There are tactful ways to handle that, and what we're going to do is go through the rest of these PowerPoints. There's a couple of videos we're going to watch, and then we'll talk through some actual situations. Does that sound like a good plan?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So one of the things that we really do need to understand about behavior, positive and negative behavior, is that emotions and egos affect the behavior. So when we're in these positions, we have to recognize that the emotions can run high, and we as leadership have to step back. We have to recognize what component of a conversation is emotion, what is driving that, and is ego a factor? Sometimes it's just ego that's driving a negative conversation, and you can step back from that. We'll talk about that a little more, and you'll get a kick out of some of the videos that we're going to watch, or one of them. The snowflake theory is really important too, and kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Does anyone know what the snowflake theory is? The snowflake theory is based on the fact that when we think about a snowflake, they're all still made up of water, and yet each one is individual. Our fingerprints, with the exception of identical twins, everyone has their own individual fingerprints, but we're still humans. We're still made up of basically the same organs and the same elements, but we are still individual, and we have to learn that. Our pasts, our parents, our geographical locations, our religion, our eating habits, our health condition, many, many things play a role in that. And so we have to think about that. And that's part of taking those courses, the diversity training offerings that we have, help us to understand that there are many things contributing to conversations. They're also contributing to the overall tone, the culture of the conversation. And we want to be careful that when we're trying to have intentional conversations, that we're trying to be sure we're having crucial conversations, that we're delving into behavior management, not psychotherapy. We're not here to offer therapy to anyone or to get into it at that level. What we have to identify is the behaviors that we need to change and then work on that.
Michaela, this is Kirsten. Just checking to see which slide I'm supposed to be on at this point.
The video, the first, it's not about the nail video.
Okay, sorry. I got behind here. I didn't have it where it was going. So it's coming up here.
And
All
so
right.
with this video, right before we started, I just want you to think about the title of it is It's Not About the Nail. And so listen to the conversation and see if you can figure out what's happening and where this is going and relate to it.
All right, and then same thing this time. You're going to push the button to play it so that your Wi-Fi works at the right at your house. So you'll just go and hit the play button, and then when enough time's gone by, we'll say everyone's done. So give me a thumbs up, okay?
It says video is unavailable.
Do you want to grab it and put it in the chat?
It's working on my end, so.
On mine.
It's working on mine.
Can you go back again and post it? Because I clicked on it and I got a different screen.
Let me just grab it. If I go back out, it will stop it for everyone else. They can't hear while I'm talking, so just 1 second.
I'm working off of a brand new Android and it does not want email. So this will not work for me.
Okay, so we'll give you just a couple minutes to get caught up, and then I want to hear what you think about the video. What did you think
Yeah,
about the
that's not a
video?
problem. I can't see it. I'm not on a regular computer with an email, so it
Oh,
won't
I'm
work.
sorry about
Sorry.
that.
We can't hear it if everybody keeps talking, though.
Ow!
Come on, if you would just don't try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it.
So Kirsten, after a minute or so, if you advance to the next slide, that'll get us started.
Okay, Michaela, I went forward to the next slide.
All right. Let's see. It didn't load for me. Did it load for anyone else?
Yes, I just clicked on the arrow to the left of the slide and it advanced it.
All
Where
right.
it says slide 6 of 15, advance it to slide 7 of 15.
It did it for me with nothing that I did on my part.
Well, it's more
I
fun
finally
and
went-
exciting. So
I
thank
finally
you.
went
So
to YouTube and was able to watch it.
wonderful. So take a couple minutes and tell me what you thought. Could that have been a difficult conversation? Was that a difficult person to deal with? Or whom do you think was the difficult person in that conversation?
He was.
The guy.
Oh, I thought she was.
It comes down to perception a lot of the time. It depends on which way you look at it. And I think that's kind of the key that I want people to get when they look at that video. And I use that on DRs often just as like a 15-minute icebreaker to have this type of a conversation. And it's always interesting to me that there are people who see different sides of that. And I think it's wonderful because it's a great way for us to recognize that we all look at conversations differently. So we want to talk just a moment, though, about crucial conversations. And if those two people just have to work together day to day, that crucial conversation about what's going on, it may not have the same value. There are three really important elements to a crucial conversation. The stakes are high. And in that video, I'm not sure what the stakes were other than she wanted to feel heard. There are differing opinions. And then the third is emotions run high. And I think certainly in that video that we just watched, there were definitely differing opinions. He was listening, but he wasn't really listening at first. He wanted to solve. And so his approach to the conversation is a little different. And then when she didn't feel heard, she just wanted to speak, then of course those emotions are in there. But it's really important for us to recognize that any type of crucial conversation or intentional conversations that we have, that part of the things that can lead it to being difficult is the fear of how the other person might react, the impact that conversation can have on our relationship. I know we were speaking just a few moments ago. Well, what if it's the manager? How is that going to impact me? What will be the outcome of that? What is the impact on me, or what is the impact on the other individual? And then sometimes it's how much time does it take? On a DRO, we often are really feeling that pinch for time, and we want to get things done in a hurry. And so we're struggling with taking the time for the conversation. But if we don't take the time for the conversation, the behavior will not change. It will not get addressed. If we don't hold people accountable, we'll lower the standard for everyone. I know I've been on teams where I saw somebody do something that I knew wasn't the best behavior, or maybe they said something that I didn't think was kind or the right way to say it. And the first thing that came to my mind was, well, if they let them do that, they may let everyone do it. And so we don't want to set ourselves up for failure. We want to set ourselves up for success in all of our actions. Part of being a good team lead is managing everyone's expectations and letting them know that we want each member of our team to hold each other accountable. We all want to strive for best communication practices. And it's very important that the goal is to resolve behavior and performance issues. Again, we're not talking about psychotherapy. We're still being kind. We're still being compassionate. We're being attentive to what's going on. And there can be a lot of factors influencing the conversation. But when we have to have a crucial conversation or an intentional conversation, we need to address behavior, performance issues, tangibles that we can measure and look to improve. Any questions so far? Kirsten, would you go to the next slide, please?
I have
go ahead.
One quick question. Would you mind saying again, because I liked it enough that I'm writing it down, if we don't hold folks accountable, we
lower the standard for everyone.
That's it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So this is another video. I'm hoping we can work through this one well.
So we're going to do this a little different this time, okay? So I will go find the link if you're not compatible to this, and I'm going to mute everyone. And then if you have a question that's not working, just type it in the sidebar, because if you speak while the video is going, you can't hear what the video is saying. So I'm going to mute everyone at this point. Then Michaela, you'll have to unmute yourself when we come back.
Okay.
And we'll go from there. Okay. media review for Crucial Conversations.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. The video stopped here and I don't know why it had the whole video.
I think it's because the internet lost its connection here. It dropped everything that was on. It dropped me out of the call all of a sudden.
May have been. Well, we'll let folks, if anybody else is still watching, we can give them a couple minutes and we can just
Or they
go
can
forward.
and if they're watching, they can still go into the link and fast forward it.
Yes. So give us a thumbs up for the folks who are still watching if you've finished it. Right, Kirsten, when you're ready, if you'll go to the next slide, please. All right, so I want to take just a moment and ask you guys, what did you think of that video? No thoughts? Can someone come off mute and tell me what you thought about it? I see Susan ordered the book.
I thought it highlighted how we sometimes perceive things very differently in the same conversation. And I thought, oh, he needs to get a mirror real quick and show her because she just doesn't get it. And so it made me realize that sometimes I need to think about what would be the mirror for the conversation that I'm in.
I like that. And one of the techniques that we talk about is mirroring, but you know, we really want to be sure is that we're thinking about it in terms of how is the other person hearing what we say. But the video on crucial conversations where we're talking, it's a lot of information cram packed in there, but a lot of great ideas. we want to get started with the next slide. Kirsten, can you get it? All right, we've got it. So hang on. Before having a crucial conversation, there's some things you want to ask yourself. And remember that if you are preparing to have a conversation with a difficult person, that you really need to be calm yourself. You need to prepare a couple things, be ready to have this conversation. Maybe you just need to vent for yourself first. But in preparation for this conversation, think about it. And you'll see I put people's names in here because I don't like communicating about people in third party. So does Margaret have all of the information? And I literally ask myself this. I'll go into a private room where other people don't hear me, and I think about it. Does Elizabeth, does she have all of the information that she'll need to have made this decision or to behave this way? Maybe whatever the problem is, the action that she's doing is because I didn't share all of the information that I should have shared. Do I have all of the information? And I may not. I need to go into a serious conversation prepared to learn that maybe my perception of what's going on is wrong. I need to hear the other side too. Were the instructions and the expectations clear? And I have a perfect example of this. On a recent DRO, we had a volunteer who had been working at the office helping us, was kind of supporting in different ways, but just being maybe an ambassador of sorts. And last minute, we had to open up 6 shelters right away. And she was asked if she would go work at a shelter for the night shift. And she said, yes, absolutely. And so the shelter team was so excited. And they sat her down and did a little 20-minute shelter review, covering with her, sent her on out to the shelter. And about midnight, we get a call from the shelter, and they're asking where the worker is. And go send somebody out to check on it, to see what was going on. They had tried to call her. She didn't answer the phone. Well, what do you think could have happened?
She didn't know you meant tonight?
That would have been a good option. In this particular case, no one specified she had to stay awake. She turned her phone off and climbed onto a cot and went to sleep with everyone else. And it seems like a silly thing. We think we're sending folks out to the shelter. She had never worked a shelter before. And when the shelter supervisor was talking to her and we were there together, and the shelter supervisor had that light bulb moment when she said, I never told you that you have to stay awake if everyone else is sleeping. And so it was not clearly explained to her. The expectation of the supervisor was that she knew what sheltering was, what they needed to do, but they hadn't. They had just covered the safety rules. What do I have to do, or what do you need to do to be safe? And she had told everyone, the clients in the shelter, which cot she was in, and if they needed her, they could come get her. So she was really trying to have been a good shelter worker, but no one explained that to her. They took it for granted. Are there some obstacles? Is there a broken or a bad process in place that might be contributing to this? And does Matthew have the training, the tools, or the capability of doing the tasks that I've asked them to do? Is it possible that they just have not had that experience or exposure, or were they field promoted and they don't have the skill set yet? Did they need coaching and mentoring and too much was asked of them at once? And sometimes when I'm in that separate room preparing for that conversation, I'm running through my list of the 14 things that have annoyed me. And that is wrong of me. Do not make a laundry list. Pick 1 or 2 things to have this conversation about. What are the top 1 or 2 priorities that you need addressed most urgently? And have that conversation. Open the doorway to having a 2-way conversation. A person cannot be forced to do anything. It's your responsibility as a supervisor or a manager or a peer who is coaching somebody or shepherding them in a new path to clarify expectations, offer choices. But remember that we must enforce consequences and we must document. Sherry, you have your hands up?
Hey, Miss Michaela, my cousin.
Hey.
So we had a really fun experience when I was out there in Mississippi. And one of the challenges that we find sometimes on a Red Cross DR is that they do send people out who are not physically capable of doing the job to which they are assigned.
Yes, and that's not even unique to Mississippi, but yes, that does happen.
And so you had some wonderful tools to help me deal with that situation.
Well, thank you so much. And I think it's really important, you know, we watched in the video, start with the heart. And by that, it means be kind, give grace. You can offer constructive criticism in a positive manner, but that still needs to be constructive. There needs to be information shared so that the other person can help improve the behavior. Can we have the next slide, please, Kirsten? So now that you've thought about this and you've decided these are the two things that are my biggest priority, that we're going to tackle these, and then we can kind of go forward from that, the actual conversation. It's time to have it. Do not have a constructive, a serious, or an intentional conversation with someone in public. Please find a private place, preferably one that's comfortable, where you can sit down and have this conversation as a peer. Even as a manager, you want to be able to have some eye contact. I've got slide 10 up in front of me. I see Nancy's may still be on 9. Stay focused on the problem behavior. I've found that sometimes people tend to wander. They want to explain things and get off target. And sometimes listening to the explanation may bring out a bad process or something that's not working that contributed to this. But remember to stay focused. Do not let emotions get in the way of what the conversation. You may have to take a break. It's okay if you need to stop for a moment and let somebody regroup. Set the tone and maintain control. If you are trying to have a constructive conversation with somebody, remember that you have to lead by example. Be polite, be calm, be kind, and give grace as often as you possibly can. Until you've heard everything they have to say, you really don't know the whole picture. Listen closely and respond with empathy. I found that most often when I'm preparing to have a serious conversation, that I really need to book out or block out enough time to listen. I'm not going in to be the bulldozer and to say, listen, this is what you have to do. And if that's what you're in, that position where you feel like you have to have that type of a conversation, then it's time for you to ask your supervisor or your manager, can they support you? Because you don't want to be the bulldozer in the conversation. It will generally not go very well. Involve the responder in developing an action plan. Even on a DRO, you can typically find a way to develop an action plan. It doesn't have to be long and drawn out and as detailed as we would a volunteer improvement plan that you implement for weeks at a time. It may be that you're taking steps throughout the day and saying, okay, I'm going to check in on you and see how things are going in 2 hours. And in this virtual environment, it may be, you know, can we book out a few extra minutes before the day gets started tomorrow so we can check progress? But they need to be a part of the plan. Sometimes they have solutions that you didn't think of, or their solutions may bring to point some ideas that you didn't realize were involved in it. That it leads us to getting buy-in. You know, if the person has skin in the game, they're a lot more likely to come along and do things the way you need them to get done. And sometimes I find that it's difficult to get buy-in from individuals. And when that happens, I try to bring it back to the mission and the principles. Most people volunteer with Red Cross because they believe in our mission. They believe in our principles. And you can always find a way to bring your statements back to the mission, the principles, the clients that we're serving, or if we're working in staff services, our clients may be the other responders, but bring it back to that. Then you've got a common playing field you're all working on, and it helps the other person feel like they're a part of the solution. So when you've had this conversation, you think you understand, you need to take the time to be sure they understand. And the only way to confirm that they understand is to ask. So leave enough time to ask that and be sure that you're finding out, do they understand it in the same way that you understand it? And then you want to document the conversation. When did it happen? The things that led up to it, the who, what, where, when, and why of the conversation. So why do you think we document conversations? Somebody can come off mute and tell me.
Cover thy own butt.
That's one reason, and it definitely is. But the other reason is if you're documenting the coaching and the mentoring that you're doing for somebody, then you'll have that information when you get ready to write their performance evaluation of the strengths and the things that they've learned and the ways that they've improved. So take that, absolutely, Liz. It can be part of the evaluation process. And then it's also, there's times when you have to go back and give that second coaching session, that part of progressive discipline, if it leads to that. And during that conversation, then you could say, well, remember when we spoke yesterday about these things? And you have the details of it. Throughout all of this, try to avoid responding emotionally. Yes, Belinda?
Sorry, I have a couple of things happening in my room at the same time. So I had a question about the documentation. So some of what happens is there's a volunteer who would go from DR to DR, and let's say a particular issue keeps on coming up. So a lot of times, to be fair or kind, even if I document it, I wouldn't describe it in the actual evaluation. But I don't necessarily know what to do with those notes, right? Or I might not put it in as explicitly in the evaluation, but then I don't know what to do with those notes, right? And so, I mean, that's something that I've struggled with too, because I like to give benefit of the doubt to people. And then by the time the 2 weeks is up, maybe that's when it's really become apparent. So I struggle a little bit about this. So I guess my question is, what do we do with notes that we have? Because it's not always explicitly written in the evaluation.
Okay, yeah, it's a great question, and you're not the only one with it. I see Deb's got the same question. And remember that anything that happens on the DRO that can be coached and improved and resolved on the DRO, then you've done that. You've coached it, you've improved it. It's the person themselves has incorporated that and moved forward. And in that case, the things that would go in their evaluation might be a statement that was situationally appropriate, where you talked about how with coaching, this person was able to accomplish these tasks. If it's something small that you didn't feel was important enough to document, then it probably should not be in their evaluation. But when you finish the DRO and that person has gone home, then the notes get torn up and they go away. If it's important enough to go forward with the volunteer, then there should be mention of it in their evaluation. If the person struggled with attending meetings and getting their reports done on time, then there is a tactful, kind, polite way to mention that in the evaluation. If it's not important enough to go in a narrative, then it doesn't need to be documented forward. Now, if this is your home region, then you may want to have a conversation with the individual and say, hey, these are some things that we really want to work on. And you put that in the narrative of the evaluation. But staff relations on the DR is the only function on the DR that enters information into the new forms that are in Volunteer Connection now, and that will then be forwarded to their home region. And so remember that you also have staff relations as a support on a DRO. You also have your manager or the AD, your peers who, with discretion, you should be able to ask them for support and guidance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, next slide, please. Should be coming up on slide 11. right, thank you. So hostile situations, I wish they didn't happen. They really, I wish they were not there, but it's a reality. We know that they do occur. Safety first. Above all, always place yourself and the other team members' safety first. Now, of course, we should hopefully see a lot less of these in COVID. We have fewer people on the ground, but know your resources. Get help if needed. Sometimes it's just pulling in another person that you know has a calming effect and might be able to bring a sense of calm to the conversation. There's been many times that I've found a DMH worker or found a disaster spiritual care worker and just said, hey, would you mind being part of the conversation? Sometimes having an extra person there who you trust and have confidence in can bring that, sense of calm to that conversation. Remember to clarify the goal. Sometimes people take it as confrontational, and we have to be mindful of our language, our tone, our volume, our stance. Some people don't like us leaning in, so remember your nonverbal is a big part of this. Clarify the goal. Stay calm. Remember that you're setting the tone for this conversation. Reflect away from the person and redirect to the problem. So if the person is feeling confronted or this is stressing them in that way, then remember to take it back to the mission and bring it back to the specific problem behavior that you're trying to correct. Stand your ground, but do not argue. You don't have to agree with what they're saying. If the person is trying to defend something that's inappropriate, you stand your ground, take a deep breath, be calm, patient, and wait it out. And limit expectations. And by that, I mean not every conversation is a win-win conversation. Very often when we're going into constructive conversations with individuals, we want them to know that it's a positive outcome if it improves, but that there will be consequences. There may be as serious as you just have to change their gap. It may be that they're not happy doing the task that you have them doing, and you're going to work with the team to seek them another assignment. Take the problem seriously and reinforce that aggressive behavior is never appropriate. Any comments? No. Kirsten, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So this is just kind of a simple exercise. We'll talk through a little bit of this, and I'm hoping that you guys will participate a little bit. So frequent things that come to staff relations or that come up in staff meetings when we're talking about it, behaviors that we really don't want to see are that chronic complainer, the hothead, the person who was always yelling, that manager that somebody asked about earlier, or the know-it-all. He wants to do things their way and no other way and not give people the opportunity to learn for themselves. The procrastinator and the marshmallow. What do you think we mean by the marshmallow? Yeah, very malleable person, but it's somebody that you just really can't pin them down. Somebody mentioned earlier, they're doing things, but you don't know what they're doing. You're not getting things done. And so we've got some coping responses over here on the other side of the page, some things that you can try, see if they work. Clarify the expectations. Sometimes people just didn't really know what the expectation was. Praise people. Sometimes people just need to feel like what they were doing worked. If the person was complaining chronically, you didn't know what was going on, maybe they just didn't feel like they were being heard. Turn a complaint into a request. And so I've had situations where somebody said, well, but if we did it this way and we tried these other 3 things, and so what I would do is turn that into, well, give me some suggestions in writing, but for now, can we just do it this way to get us until this next person? Can we get through this next cycle? Can we do something else? Or if you think it's a great idea, can you submit that? Let's see if we can send that to Lessons Learned and see what other people think about that. Remember mutual interests. You want them to be on the same page as you when you're working forward, if at all possible. Try to get back to the mission. The mission is almost always a mutual interest that you have, or if you have two different things that need to be done, see if there's some commonality in them. That give the monkey back was a phrase that Ray uses often, and with that to us is kind of turning that back to a request. Turn that back over to the other person. If they're chronically complaining about things, then ask them to come up with a solution to it. What would be their ideal solutions? Be politely assertive. Remember I said to be kind, give grace, but you're still the supervisor or the manager or the person who's trying to steer this conversation. So it is appropriate to be politely assertive. Be consistent, be fair. And we spoke earlier about this mirroring. You know, if somebody is leaning into you, then you may want to lean into them. If they're leaning away from you, lean back a little bit, give them space. If you're mirroring some of their nonverbal things, then they're more likely to be comfortable with the conversation. And then empty the bucket. If you have a person who is chronically complaining, they're just frustrated all the time, things aren't going well, when you get ready to listen to them, let them empty the bucket. Let them tell you everything that they want to say. You know, if it's somebody that you really feel needs to vent, needs to get it all out, then just listen, nod, let them get this out, and then together you can come up with some ways to work and move forward. Thoughts? Yes, Belinda?
Yeah, so I didn't speak the whole time earlier because I wasn't in front of a computer, but now I can raise my hand. Okay, so there is one type of person that I have a hard time working around. So they're kind of like a jokester, can kind of be a gaslighter, but I think what's at the bottom of it is that they don't acknowledge my authority. And I like to say it's a woman thing too, because it's often a man that I have an issue with. But it's like every time I make a suggestion or I try to be serious, they may not take it, or they take it as a joke, right? Or they say, oh, it's not really that serious. And so it's really hard to pin them down. Is that a situation where I really can't have that conversation and I need to bring somebody else in because it's directly related to me?
I think that sometimes you may have to bring somebody else in because I don't know the situation exactly. I think that you have to be clear. You have to think about what actions are you exhibiting that might cause this person to, I hate to say not have respect, but is there something you can do to be more clear about it? And sometimes it's a matter of just, this is an old school mentality. I know that we run into it a lot on DRs here in the South. And we have to sometimes get to the point where you ask staff relations to sit down with you and have the conversation and talk through it. Personally, I would try to have a one-on-one conversation and be upfront, be honest, clarify the expectations and say, listen, these are the things that you're doing that cause me to feel like you don't respect my position. And then give that person a chance to say what they want to say.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Thanks. Because I might be misinterpreting them not taking my direction as something else, that they're not taking the direction.
Maybe their hearing aid isn't working.
Okay. All right.
Sherry, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask about, so you talked about the one who wants to empty the bucket. The ones that I have more trouble with are the ones who won't talk to me. So when we're having a purposeful conversation, they just shut down and I can't elicit any response. Suggestions?
Well, and if we go back to the video that we watched, we talked about people retreat to silence or violence. And so if they're retreating to silence, you have to get a better understanding of what's going on. Is there something else contributing to that? And it may be that what you need to say is, or take a pause, Give maybe a 30-second or 60-second pause to see if they will say anything. And then if they don't, then say, I don't understand why you won't tell me what's going on. And you're putting that in that sense, it's putting it back onto yourself. You're saying, I don't understand. I need you to share information with me for me to understand. And that way you're putting the onus on them to share, but you're taking the responsibility for not knowing what's going on at that time. It can be a very difficult situation to be in if they won't talk, but I think most of the time you can turn that around. And again, you have staff relations on a DR. In a non-operational state, perhaps you could go to your manager, or if it's a chronic problem, then you might reach out to volunteer relations. I know that we do that also.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. So a formula for success, and this kind of blends over not just our difficult conversations, but it also includes those difficult conversations, is select the right people. Remember on a DRO that we really need to do a good job induction, do an interview, match the people to the right job if you at all can do that. Choose the positive attitude. And that's on us. We individually choose our own positive attitude. When you get ready to have a conversation, when you get up in the morning or you get ready to start a call, you select the attitude that you're going to have when you begin that conversation. So choose it and choose positive. Listen before responding. One of the hardest lessons for me early on was to know that I had to allow that pause, especially with people who are quiet. Sometimes they're afraid. They don't know what to say. They don't know if you're willing to listen to what they have to say. So listen before you respond. Sometimes when people are trying to tell you something, they really only get half the story out to begin with. Use the word I rather than you. You know yourself best, but when you start saying you, then you're putting phrases, statements, emotions, or things in an almost confrontational way. So just try to do it in such a way that you're starting most of your sentences with I, and this is how I feel when these things come up. Remember to confront issues, not the person. Confront behaviors, not the individual. Mutually explore alternatives whenever possible. Sometimes the other person just can't seem to come up with good alternatives, but I find that most of the time, if you have a calm conversation and you ease into it, you can get people to also explore alternatives and have suggestions and think outside of the box. And sometimes the suggestions that they first come up with, you don't feel are right at all. Well, that's okay. Just keep exploring. So write down the goals and evaluate. I like to call it QCing my expectations. I quality control it or quality check my expectations. So if you write them down, then you know if you both understand the expectations. You give the person something to take away with them. They can actually look at it later, think about it, come up with some other ideas even. It also gives you some information that you might need later for your documentation. Intervene in a timely manner. And this is really a big one. If it wasn't a problem for 5 days, why is it a problem today? So if somebody has been behaving in a way that was unacceptable for 5 days and you just now got to it, it's not their failure that it took you 5 days to get to it. As supervisors, managers, activity leads, it's our responsibility to intervene in a timely manner. And if I've had somebody who for 5 days has been doing something, or 15 days, then and it's never been addressed, it should not be in their evaluation. It must have been addressed in order for it to be brought back up in their evaluation. And bring it back to the mission and principles. We mentioned it earlier, but it really does make a big difference. Be kind, give grace. Remember that the other person may be having something going on in their life that you know nothing about. We don't know what their background is. We don't know what family situation may have contributed to a unique experience that caused them to have an emotional reaction. So give grace. It's an example of a great leader if you can go into every conversation with the intent of giving grace. And if you can come out of that meeting having given grace, it speaks to how much of a leader you are and how skilled you are at it. And document. We mentioned it before. Document the details, because remember, your document can be used for additional documentation if you need it. If you have to go to staff relations and we have to pull together a staff report form, we can do that. If you get ready to do their evaluation and you realize that you gave them constructive criticism, they incorporated it, and the behaviors improved, that's information, that's kind of meat for the bone that you can use to help develop a really well-worded evaluation. Next slide. So I want to put our fundamental principles on here because they just really mean that much to me. And our 7 fundamental principles provide ethical, operational, and an institutional framework. They are the skeleton through which we provide our mission and our services to everyone. And all of that is done because each of you on this call, because you've taken the time to be a part of this and to have this conversation with me. What I'm hoping that you guys can do is now take this forward and have conversations with your team members. Learn to incorporate constructive feedback in everyday conversations. You'll learn to appreciate each other's strengths and be able to be really great leaders. Thank you all very much for spending an hour and a few minutes with me this evening. Are there any thoughts, questions, comments?
You have a very kind voice. I may need to call you for all of my meetings.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really helped in terms of kind of clarifying some of the things we get into on DRs.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And being comfortable with having the conversation is the key. Don't be afraid of talking to people. Great leaders spend the time getting to know each other, and that includes giving feedback. So thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Michaela. This is such helpful information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.